Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure this morning to welcome Peter Lineham into our service, who's going to speak to us in due course. We look forward to that, Peter. Thank you very much. You have had quite a long tradition and experience in matters religious, and we look forward to that contribution from you. Our theme this morning is the future of faith and the church. To you who are searching for meaning, ready for learning, welcome. To you who are thirsty for purpose, burning for challenge, welcome. To you who seek to be inspired and empowered by God's life spirit, welcome. To you who are yearning for comfort, eager for serving, welcome. We come together as a community of faith and compassion. We open our hearts and minds to you, Spirit God. Come, inspire us, dwell with us, and make us one in your Spirit. Welcome to worship. And now I invite you to share amongst you, and just acknowledge those around you for a minute. Share a verbal greeting if you wish, but remember the COVID-19 precautions. Thank you. Welcome. I think it's good to do this. Let us enter into worship. Today we celebrate a dream awakening. Today we worship with renewed hope in our hearts. Today we act on an audacity of hopes and dreams of the future. Today we begin the hard work for justice, equity and compassion in all human relations. For today is a day like no other, and it is ours to shape with vision and action. Let us worship together and celebrate a dream awakening. I've lit the candle. I hope it stays alight. By the light of this chalice, we prepare for the future. We prepare ourselves for the times of triumph and times of trial that might come. We prepare ourselves to be present to one another with loving hearts, even in the most difficult of times. We prepare ourselves to make the connections that will lift us out of isolation and prepare the path of justice and equity. And with that, let us sing our first hymn, Joyful, joyful. I invite you to pause for a moment, to bring your full awareness to this sanctuary, this sacred space, to breathe, to remember your breath. Often, when we meditate, we close our eyes. But this morning, I invite you to keep your eyes open. To open your eyes, your ears, your hands, your hearts. Notice the aliveness of your own body. Can you hear your own heart and your own breath? Can you feel it? Notice also the aliveness of those around you and the aliveness of this sacred space. Let your senses be awakened here, opened to colour and shape, to sound and light, to music and breath, to the spirit of life, the spirit that animates all things. This is a house of worship, our house of worship. we gather here to give worth and meaning to our lives, to honour the presence and mystery of the divine that greets us in our coming and in our going out, in our very being, in our being here. We who have come here today to this house of worship have brought our whole selves, all of who we are, our exuberance and our worries, our grudges and our awakenings, our distractions and our callings, the storms and joys of being human. We have brought our dreams to this religious community and our passions for the values we cherish most. I invite you to bring to your consciousness your dreams for our house of worship, for this community of love and care. What dreams do you bring? What blessings do you offer? What word of hope and inspiration do you carry? So let us take a moment of silence together. In the silence, allow a word or a phrase to come to mind, a word of blessing, a word of hope, a word of intention. May this sanctuary be blessed as a place of love and peace. And now I invite Peter to come and talk to the all-age part of our service. And would the young people like to come forward? I'm sure Peter would like to show you something of interest. Where are these children?
The year was 1982. And this man, Steve Callum, had the plan to sail in his fantastic yacht across the Atlantic, a big journey. But he was 3 days out from Cornwall in England when the most extraordinary storm tore the boat apart. And he managed to escape into that little life raft, a plastic life raft. He had with him a small amount of food and 7 flares. You know, flares can go way up into the sky, yeah?
What are flares?
Flares, well, how would I describe it? A flare's a kind of bright shining light that zooms up into the sky and you can see it from a long way away. You've probably seen flares occasionally up in the sky.
Is it like a shooting star?
Yes, it's like a shooting star, except that you shoot it, okay? And so he set off, and so he used a flare, and nobody came. He had food for about 7 days, water, not very much water, and he thought, somebody's going to have to come. So the next day he sent off another flare, and nobody came. And the next day, the third flare, and so on and so forth, for a week. Nobody could find him. They must have known he was missing, but they probably assumed they found the wreckage of his yacht and thought he was dead. And so there he was, in that tiny little thing in the huge Atlantic Ocean, and he thought, well, I'm not going to survive, but I'm going to try. So he would pull down the top and just let the water gather from the rain, because you can't drink seawater, it's salty. And he began slowly to work out a kind of way to spear and harpoon fish, and it was almost impossible to do because there was hardly any around. But little by little he got better at it, and the days began to pass. I can't survive, he thought. Where am I going? What is happening? But he did find, and he caught his first fish. Can you imagine how excited he was to catch that fish? And he said that he found that actually fishes, it was best to eat everything because he was so hungry and there was so little fish. He was a big man and he began to shrink and shrink and shrink because of so little food. And the rain sometimes, of course it was scary because leaving it open, suddenly the rain would pour in and then he'd be caught in a storm. And the days passed. Well, do you know how long he bobbed across the Atlantic?
No.
79 days. That's 2.5 months across the Atlantic.
That's possible.
It's incredible that he could survive. Everybody thought he was dead. And then one day he saw the clouds gathering and he thought, I wonder if I'm getting close to land. And people, the birds, began gathering above his boat, and he was near an island, and the fishermen came out thinking that there was a shoal of fish, and there they found this funny little life raft, half ripped, a hole in the bottom that had been torn in the bottom, and he had to try and plug it, but he had survived. You can look up the story and you can find all about it. It's one of the most incredible stories that actually it is possible to do the most extraordinary things with very, very little if you've got some hope. Isn't that a great story? Fantastic, thank you.
It's possible to survive when you just don't have much food.
Yes, you can, because you see, he learned about fish and all the life in the water. It was really incredible. You can look up and see how he caught the fish. Ask your mum to help you look it up.
Our next hymn. Thank you.
Jesus Okay. Good morning, everyone. So last week, we had a question that goes, how can we make the most of what we have? And pretty much all of us agreed that the best way we can do that is by sharing, no matter how little or how much we have. It feels a lot more when we share it with others. So share your talents, share your resources, share your time and efforts with people around you, and people you haven't met yet, once you meet them, obviously. And if you haven't yet, give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, try again. What matters is that we persist, we continue, we persevere. For this week, we have another question, and it goes, well, it's on the screen. What difficult situations have you overcome? Today's gospel reading recounts Peter putting his faith in Jesus into practice. As Jesus approaches their boat, walking on the water, the disciples are terrified that he might be a ghost. Peter tells Jesus, "Tell me to come to you on the water," and Jesus does. Peter starts to walk on the water as well, but starts to lose faith in himself when he witnesses the strong winds, and subsequently starts to sink. Then he begs Jesus to save him, and he does, but not without scolding him a little bit. I think it goes, "Ye of little faith." That's very old. Anyway, an analogy that I would like to consider is an airplane flight. No matter how many times we've been up in the air, turbulence is an unwelcome surprise. But we trust our pilot to get us through it despite the danger, just like Jesus guiding Peter onto the water. Each of us has probably faced a similar dilemma in our lives. What are some of our experiences when we felt our faith and mettle were being tested? And if you're really onto it, you could also talk about what helped you to conquer your fears. When we share in life stories together, it can help others to feel empowered and encouraged to continue living in love and in faith. Perhaps our inspiration can become something bigger than ourselves. So don't hesitate to answer. What difficult situations have you overcome? And as per usual, we'll have the whiteboard in the lounge later, and maybe you can have a think about the question, how you want to answer it over a cup of coffee. Thank you.
Here. Oh, right behind.
Good morning. Today's reading comes from Matthew 14, verses 22 to 33. Jesus walks on the water. Then Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead on the other side of the lake while he sent the people away. After sending the people away, he went up a hill by himself to pray. When evening came, Jesus was there alone, and by this time the boat was far out in the lake, tossed about by the waves because the wind was blowing against it. Between 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to the disciples walking on the water. When they saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and screamed with fear. Jesus spoke to them at once. "Courage," he said. "It is I. Don't be afraid." Then Peter spoke up. "Lord, if it is really you, order me to come out on the water to you." "Come," answered Jesus. So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water to Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he was afraid and started to sink down in the water. "Save me, Lord," he cried. At once Jesus reached out and grabbed hold of him and said, "What little faith you have! Why did you doubt?" They both got into the boat and the wind died down. Then the disciples in the boat worshipped Jesus. "Truly you are the Son of God," they exclaimed.
Peter, would you like this? Do you like this? Okay.
Well, the question that has always perplexed me about this was, should Peter have got out of the boat and into the water? Can't say it's the first question that would have occurred to me. Can I step out and start walking on the water? And I want to argue, however, in this talk, that he did the right thing in wanting to step out onto the water, and that's got some big implications for us. Now, I don't know whether you remember the practical context of this reading, that immediately prior to this, Jesus has fed the 5,000 people. It's been a sensational day for the disciples. You know, they've seen a high level of miracle and drama taking place, and the disciples doubtless would have liked to have stayed with the crowd and lapped up the excitement and the enthusiasm. Great time. You know, we all have these occasions when the crowd makes us feel so excited. And Jesus sends them off. It's hard to actually understand why he sends them off, but there seems to have been a deliberate intention of Jesus when he saw a crowd to see some risk that actually the crowds might go in the wrong direction, might turn it into a political movement, for example. Anyway, the disciples are sent off on the boat. Jesus heads off in another direction to go and pray, and there are the disciples, and they're not without boating experience. Some of them are very seasoned fisher folk who are well used to being out on the Lake of Galilee. But on the other hand, if they had any sense, they knew when normally to go for land if there was any sign of difficulties in the water. I mean, I don't know about this story about how we all enjoy the turbulence in the air. I can't think of anything more horrifying than turbulence in the air or being on a little ship at night. And if I was a Jew of that day and age, very little experience, you understand, of sailing. The Jews are not a seafaring people. And so this must have been terrifying to them. And then somewhere between, so the fourth watch is a Roman measure. So that means that this is between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So it must have been an awful night. If they're in a rough sea, desperate for sleep after an incredibly busy day, and then they see this figure walking towards them. It must have been such a strange experience. And there are stories that before people drown, they see ghosts or spirits wandering towards them, and I'm figuring that through their minds were going the thought that this is the end. There's a really interesting touch in the version of the same story told in Mark, where it says Jesus would have passed them by until Peter calls out to him. It's an intriguing possibility that, we can miss opportunities because we're frightened and we don't know what to do with things. But at this point, in this version of the story, Peter chances everything on the fact that this really is Jesus calling out to him. So he starts in his little course in miracles, if you like, and it doesn't go very well. So he says, can I come out? You know the story. And of course, how the story should have gone, to my mind, is that he would step out of the boat immediately. This is what I would like the story to have been. Immediately the storm would stop. You understand? And Peter would walk upon something that was like a frozen lake towards Jesus. But was it like that? No, unfortunately. The exact opposite. The storm carries on. The troubles seem to intensify. Well, I bet they intensify if you're stepping out into a storm. And not surprisingly, Peter feels incredibly shocked by the circumstances and is just about sunk before Jesus hauls him out. And not until they make it back to the boat does the storm stop. Okay, now I just can't resist a little bit of allegorizing of this here passage. In fact, I rather think that it was provided for us because it's a story that we need as Christians to deal with lots of circumstances that happen in our lives. And I want to particularly interpret it for us being Christians in our land and in our place in these days, because it does feel as though the storms are with us. I'm going to take you through some slides of we'll just look at the first one firstly. I've been digging, I'm mad on statistics, I don't know why. And the trouble is, when you look at the statistics on religion in New Zealand, they make for distressing reading for those of us who care about the church and care about faith. So this is the census figures, including the very latest census figure, which I didn't have when I came and talked last year to the group here in the church, the 2018 census reading. So can you see that from 2018, the proportion of Methodists in the population has dropped yet again dramatically, back to 1.5% of the population now calling themselves Methodists, from 2.2% in the 2013 census. So it looks like an increase in the decline. And in fact, there is an increase in the decline. Now, I do have to say that I'm somewhat skeptical about the 2018 census because, strangely enough, in recent censuses, a lot of people haven't answered the census question on religion. Maybe 10% haven't answered that question. That probably reflects people with second language difficulties who are not quite sure what's being expected of them to reply. But strange enough, in the 2018 census, every single person in New Zealand answered the census question. How did this come about? Well, because, as you might know, a third of New Zealanders didn't fully complete the census at all, and so the census authorities filled in the answers they thought they would have made. It's a weird concoction. They went back for those who hadn't done the census and they'd got their 2013 census and they took their answer from the 2013 answer. But there must have been a lot of people for whom that was not the case. So how did they get to this extraordinary certainty? Who knows? So, I'm a bit sceptical about just how solid that figure is, though they declare that these figures are outstandingly reliable, as they might, of course. Now look at the next one. I was fascinated because I went round, and with the caution that these figures are, are a bit sticky, I tried to look at the centres of Methodism throughout New Zealand. You see, once upon a time, Canterbury was the great Methodist stronghold. All the great churches, the connectional office, etc., etc. And of course, it's still historically, that's where the connectional office is. But can you see, firstly, just in the sheer numbers, well, just over half of Methodists are in Auckland City. And that is very, very striking. And then as a proportion of the population, and I've tried to arrange those roughly in order, though I was struggling a little bit with my graphs, so, and I will not try and do that on a PowerPoint demonstration until I've got the figures in order next time. But what I was struck to see is that Auckland at 2.3% is very significantly above anywhere else. Taranaki is, again, a centre of historic Methodism because the primitive Methodists made a huge impression in Taranaki. Yet the actual reality of Methodism in Taranaki is that it's a place of small population and with just, how many congregations? Must be three parishes, I think. So looking at this overall, it's some of those areas at the bottom, they're very, very small numbers. And these are just the census numbers. These are not the people going to church. These are just the people who call themselves Methodist. Now let's look at the next one. Then I was really intriguing. Now they've invented a new category, which I don't fully understand, called statistical units. They used to have area units, and the statistical units seem to be a little bit smaller than the old area units. And I simply took all those figures, worked out percentages, and sorted them from largest to smallest. Now, you may not have heard of some of those places, and why Mangere gets repeated 3 times and Otahuhu twice, I don't know. But do you see, this is the top 20 figures of Methodist strongholds. Now, can anybody make some observations for me about that list? They're pretty obvious. Yes, Brian?
The islanders.
Precisely. All of these places are in South Auckland. Every single one of the top Methodist spots is in South Auckland. And you can see that the proportions of the population that are Methodist in some of these areas is incredibly high. 13% in Sutton Park. I have no idea where Sutton Park is. Does anybody know where Sutton Park is? No. But I think it's in the Mangere sort of area, somewhere where you cross the motorway to head towards the airport. And then there's a lot of others in that same area. Massey Road South, Mangere, Favona. Favona is directly when you come across the bridge from Onehunga, and is on the left if you're heading towards the airport or heading towards the south. So almost all of those are in a very concentrated area, effectively the Tongan part of Auckland. So that tells us that Methodism is in fact, in New Zealand, its future is as a Tongan and to some extent Tongan and Samoan denomination. Okay? Now, I then got intrigued because I thought this is an amazing story because this is not like the rest of the New Zealand. Methodism is a very distinctive group. So then I started looking. Now, it's just the way the colour's interpreted. That creamy colour is a real colour. So I simply took all New Zealand people. What's the distribution and sort of style of the different peoples? And you can see that there's been a big drop in the proportion of Europeans in New Zealand overall. So it's down to 62%. Previous census, it was 69%. Previous census, 73, 79, you go on like that. So then there's a significant group, the large increase in Māori numbers to about between 15 and 20%. Pacific Islanders are the white colour there. That's frustrating, isn't it, that you can't really see, but that's... And then the next one, the Asian group is significantly much larger than the Pacifica people now, because Asia has gone up, so it's roughly double at 12% to what the number of Pacifica peoples are, and then the rest are small amounts. But New Zealand Methodists, do you see, 45% Pacifica, about just over 40% European, about 15% Māori, and then a small proportion of Koreans, effectively, and a small number of other Asians. Well, Auckland, of course, is not like the rest of New Zealand. The rest of New Zealanders like to tell us that, don't they? And you can see that the Auckland population has a much larger proportion of Pacifica and of Asian people, of many, many countries. And the proportion of Māori is smaller in Auckland than it is in many other parts of New Zealand. Auckland Methodists, wow, that is a striking illustration. And so it's nearly 3/4 of Auckland Methodists are Pacifica peoples. Well, let's move to Takapuna. So in Takapuna, well, the answer is that, and remember this is just census peoples, that Takapuna is one of the whitest parts of Auckland. Admittedly, this is Takapuna Central, and I think this is Takapuna South. I think the boundary between Takapuna Central and South is somewhere just north of the church, because there's a Takapuna South, a Takapuna West, and a Takapuna Central, in the way they describe it. And you can see that it's exceptionally white, with, I think, 15 Pacific Islanders living in Takapuna Central. They're all calling themselves Methodists by the look of it. Because the numbers actually in Takapuna Central Methodist, we're not looking at a lot of people, 250 people, I think, altogether in that category. I'm not saying they come to your church. Goodness knows where they go to church. Okay, now that's very interesting. Let's do another graph. I'm sorry about all these uninspiring graphs, but they're just intriguing. I will draw some point from this. I then started thinking, well, there must be an impact on the age structures. And you can see that in New Zealand as a whole, Methodists are an ageing group of people. So that's New Zealand Methodists here. And you can see that there's a very large number over the age of 65 is roughly 30%. And another 40% between the age of 30 and 64. And then the number of youth is about 12 or 15%, and the number in the 15 to 29 category, similar. In Auckland, however, the age structure is quite different, and I threw in Mangere Otahuhu, that area of huge strength of Methodism. And you can see that in Mangere Otahuhu, there's no shortage of young Methodists. There's oodles of young Methodists, and very few old Methodists, actually, in these districts. But in Devonport, Takapuna, so that's the local board area, you can see that the age structure is really, really different. That 40% of all the people who call themselves Methodists are over the age of 65. And another 40%, almost exactly 40%, are 30 to 64. So there's essentially, Methodism is not capable of continuation in the same scale or form as it currently stands. I think there may be one more graph. Yeah, now this is ridiculous graph, and I should be shot for ever displaying it this way, but I did try them around the other, and it seemed even worse around the other things. So you're not expected to get much out of this. The green is the 2006 figures. The brown is the 2013 figures, and the 2018 figures, it turns out, are essentially invisible. That's ridiculous. Okay, well, they were a different colour when I did it, but when it translated it into the thing, they changed colours. I don't know how to change the colours. So the intriguing thing about this is that there are some groups and categories that are increasing. And that's the important bit to note. And the ones to look at, notice there's huge declines in Anglicans, in various, but there are some growth, and the growth that's most striking is the Christian not further defined. So in this area, for example, Christian not further defined is now 6.5% of the population. Christians who don't claim a denomination. And there's a number of other categories that might reflect that. Notice that Catholics haven't declined much. Pentecostals, stable but not flourishing. But everybody else, some decline. Okay, and finally, what is growing? Next graph. Well, this won't surprise us. That Devonport Takapuna, the local board, look at the change in the group of people who say they have no religion. So it's now, in New Zealand overall, it's 48%. In Devonport Takapuna, not surprisingly, because it's among Western people that rejection of religion is most common, 52.3%. Mind you, there are places where it's a lot more secular than that. Even Upper Harbour is more secular than that. And there are some other spots where I come from in the Ponsonby area. That's the most secular part of New Zealand. Very trendy and very, very anti-religious. I don't think there's another graph, so I'm going to draw some points from this now. Could you just quickly check in case I did include, because I did enormous numbers of graphs and only chose the ones I thought were interesting. Could you just go one forward, one? No, there's no. Right, so now what's the point of this? Well, I think there is an incredible relevance of this because the issue is, what is the nature of our faith? The question that was being asked before. What and how should we think of these circumstances and the future of the church in these days? And I think that there's some things that are very clear. And one is, unless you're one of these effectively very sectarian types of religion, notice Catholic has survived pretty well, and some of the very narrow groups, they're fine because they inculcate into their children a very, very determined sticking at their faith. But for anybody who's vaguely open to the world, in fact, there isn't a great deal of future in what you might call denominational strands. Methodists will do fine in the future in Mangere. But that doesn't mean to say there's no future for church. What it means is that people are not going to carry a denomination as a label. I mean, there's lots of obvious reasons why this is the case. Because husbands and wives these days are not formed in the old Bible class camps as they used to be. They meet each other in other contexts, and there's a rich blend of Christians come together. And so it's striking that a lot of people choose church on the basis of the church that's appropriate for their families at this stage, and this is meaningful for them. So while there needs to be denominations that own the buildings and provide the ministers, in actual fact, this church's future lies in offering a quality of Christian faith that appeals and helps and supports the people of the community around it. And the label is almost irrelevant. And we need to bear in mind, and one thing that COVID-19 lockdown taught us, is that a lot of people without any particular denominational connections or loyalties sometimes go it solo, you know? They do their own thing, they stop connecting with church, they don't see the point of church, it's not valuable to them. Yet they're still believers. I'm sure you know people in your own families that are like this. So how and why do we belong in the boat? What's the point of the boat? Are we all to go out walking on the water, like Peter, doing our... Well, the simple fact is that it's lonely and it's hard to sustain faith. If you go out into the water, we all need a little adventure, of course, of learning to live our faith apart from just being part of the community that keeps us going. But in the end, we need each other, because just as we found in the COVID-19 lockdown, life is not meant comfortably to be lived by ourselves. And I think as Christians, we do need to hear the voice of the Lord by ourselves. We do need to be in situations where I know that God is calling me to do something. But then we need to find our way back to the boat. You know, the waters are not going to get any less stormy for believers in the foreseeable future. We can't imagine there's a happy, easy time lying ahead of us. But we want to hear the voice of the Master. We want to find the courage that comes as we realize that the Lord is with us in those points of ventures of courage and of obedience. And actually, there's a real need for all of the people in that boat to have heard the voice of Jesus. And I think myself that for our churches today here in New Zealand, we've got to courageously speak the voice of hope and purpose and vision to a very discouraged community around us. And if we speak that voice with hope, not with labels, but with hope, I believe that we will find, not that we're not going to turn into an ocean liner, we'll still be a little boat bobbing about in the water, but we will offer hope for those people. Amen.
Life Spirit, our God, we seek to be a community of grateful givers, so that as the sick know comfort, as the downhearted gain courage, as the troubled receive hope, your blessing will be recognised among us. Amen. Thank you.
Before the notices, I just want today to sincerely, really very sincerely, thank everyone who responded to the request last week and provided an abundance of food, which we as hosts of the Auckland Synod yesterday very gratefully appreciated. In that same announcement last week asking for food, people came to me and offered to be the hostesses and helpers. And to Richard on the microphone yesterday for Synod, and to Lynette, Ashleen, Heather and Susie in particular, I was very, very thankful for that support. Synod for me is always a special occasion, and yesterday was especially so for me. This was, I did better yesterday, this was the first Synod for years where Christine was not beside me as the Synod rep for Northcote Takapuna. And I felt that greatly yesterday. So therefore particularly appreciated those who were here in support. Each annual Synod is the place where we pay tribute to presbyters and significant lay representatives who have died during the previous 12 months. Yesterday, there were 4 tributes, and as they began, I suddenly realised that each one of them had been part of the journey here at Takapuna Methodist Church. The tributes paid were for Morris Copeland, Reverend Dave Mullen, Christine Peake, and Reverend Percy Rushton. Morris, in the later years of his life, after a very full life in the Methodist Church, and Christine were members of our fellowship. Reverend Percy Rushton was the outgoing president who opened our Centennial Lounge in October 1983, and then he was here and introduced to the conference in November 1983 the bicultural journey. And at that conference, I can remember sitting on the floor as your representative out in the lounge when the bicultural journey was adopted as our way to operate. And then there was Dave Mullen. Some of you will remember Dave as our supply minister back in the 90s when Mary Cagle was on leave during her ministry here. That made it a very significant synod for me. Lots and lots of wonderful memories of people who have contributed to make Takapuna Methodist Church what it is today. And the representatives of their families were also here, with the reps from the other churches in the Auckland district, and we had fellowship over morning tea in the hall following the service. And that was a time when there were many memories were also shared amongst people. So thank you to Takapuna Methodist Church. And now notices for today. 2 birthdays. The first one, Richard. Richard down there operating the camera for us this morning celebrates his birthday today. Thank you, Richard, for all you do for us, and do have a wonderful birthday with your friends and family. And to Jack, can you hear me out there in the lounge, Jack? Jack will be 10 on Wednesday, and we hope he has a lovely birthday as well. Community Matters are to meet this week in the Willoxhill room, please, at 7 o'clock. At 7:30, thank you, Jennifer. Community Matters, 7:30, please. Morning worship here next week. It will be a service during which we have our annual congregational meeting. So we're looking for a good attendance next Sunday for that. The notice on the round table today for those who would like to take part in the Takapuna Church's Women's Shared Dinner on Thursday the 27th of August. Please let us know. We need some contributions for dessert, please. And then on Sunday the 30th of August, our service will be a little different. Cafe Church with Barry and Peter leading us on that day when we gather out in the lounge for our service. Touchstone is here today, a significant opening article contributed by Barry and others regarding the bicultural journey. Couldn't be more appropriate coming at this time. Thank you all very much.
Our prayers for ourselves and others. Loving God, life spirit, let us open our hearts, still our minds, and enter this time of prayer. Let us call forth and hold in our hearts the stories of all who have come before us, the memories of those who are with us today, and the hope for tomorrow and for all of those who will come after us. Let us be thankful for this opportunity for healing, forgiveness, and reconciliation, while knowing that we can never or should never forget what has brought us here today. Let us be glad that voice has not only been given to those who sorrow and pain with their companions in this faith, but that the stories told by those voices have been received with a goal of redemption and understanding. Let us call upon that light which shines in each of us to give us the strength to walk together into the future and to do the work that is necessary and which does not end here today. Loving Spirit, let us have the wisdom to lovingly have the conversations we need to have with each other and that we must have with each other in order to grow this faith in radical love and inclusion. Amen.
Please be seated. We have reached the end of this time for the gathering of memory and for letting the imagination play with future possibilities. We have enjoyed magic moments and edified each other. Shall it be concluded here? Or will this adventure now commenced continue? Our separate paths converging, meeting, merging in the unending quest for love more perfect. The joyous struggle for meaning more sufficient and life more abundant. Is this ending to be an ending, or merely prelude to new, more glorious beginnings? I pose the question. In your hearts lies the answer. With faith in the creative powers of life, with hope for the future of life in this world, with love for all others who share this life with us, let us go forward together in peace. Our meeting has ended. Let our service begin. And we'll sing our final song. Centered on Jesus and where he will lead.